right, the next video in the series is going to be registering with Hetzner and setting up our virtual private server. I do want to call out that in the description I will have a referral where you will get 20 euros towards your first bill and I will get 10 euros towards my bill, or in cloud credits. I don't think it's necessarily going to make or break you, but a little bit might help with testing, getting set up, and kind of being sure that it works for how you want it to work. That should get you a couple of months with the plan we'll be using. At this time, I do not qualify. I need 3 more months of invoices, but I'll have this in the description at some point in time. If you don't mind helping me out, that'd be a good way to do it, but you can totally ignore it and just start your account anyway, which we'll be doing here, and we'll click login. And we don't have an account, so we'll register now. So for the email address, I want us to think back to these other videos where if we're building this for an organization, that we are going to be using our Google Workspace admin@domain.com email address, so that in the future, somebody else can log in and manage this or pay the bill without you having to be a part of it. Again, this is about the perpetuity. This is about 5 years from now, if you're no longer involved, how does this continue to work without you? And part of the reason I'm making this series the way it is for someone to come in and figure this out later. So if you're registering your account, please don't use your personal email address. Use the one for the organization. Unless you are doing this for yourself, then it's totally okay to use your personal email address. Now, I should be using something like admin@domain.com, but for this one, I'll be using Chuck at chuck- and then we'll agree. And save that password, and let's go verify that email in our inbox. And now we are adding a name. And again, if you're doing this for an organization, you can just put the organization name, such as domain, for whatever it is. In this case, I'll do Chuck Builds, and I'm not going to do a first name or title. For the contact, if your organization has a PO box, they will accept that. Use the PO box, but I don't have one for Chuck Builds, so I'll be using my real info here. And just a note for that last slide, you had to click submit before you could add a state, so don't be surprised by that. And then for payment, go ahead and call your treasurer of your organization to get the credit card. I'll be just using PayPal for me to get this set up for this video. And then ideally, you would use two-factor authentication. That's a good habit, a good way to secure your account. However, two-factor authentication would not work for an organization. So you would want to choose a good password, 1, but then 2, have someone in the future add it as a user and not be responsible for the two-factor that you get a text years from now and no one knows who got the text and they're just totally locked out. So in Hetzner, we are going to choose a new project, and we'll just call it website. And then we'll come down to right here and create a server. And we want to choose our server location. You want to choose the one that's closest to you. I'm going to be choosing Virginia. And then for the image, you would choose Ubuntu. That is a good choice. However, I'm going to kind of skip a step here and go to apps and choose docker.sock. So it is still an Ubuntu image that's being installed, but then they already have Docker loaded on top of that, and it really just takes away one step for us. For our type, we're going to use a shared vCPU just because it's cheaper, and we're not running anything intense enough to need a dedicated CPU, and we'll use x86. And then we're going to choose the cheapest option. I'm going to call out now that this is working totally fine for my other website for the organization that we're live in prod with about 700 members. And I haven't had any errors yet, or we haven't even really gotten past 20% usage. But I do want to call out this could get up there. You want to keep an eye on this. You might find that you need to tier up to the next one for the RAM for it to respond quickly. So far, I haven't had too many issues, and I would continue to recommend the cheapest option at about 4 euros per month, and after conversions, I'm expecting about $6 per month. We will be paying for a public IPv4 address, and I'll be skipping the SSH key for now. You'll receive the root password in an email. I think for newcomers, someone who's never developed or used SSH before, the key aspect might be a little bit confusing and it might be a little bit difficult in the future. I think a root password is kind of the way to go, especially for knowledge sharing through an unknown number of people to the future would be just securing that password and having that available to them. We will not be adding a volume. It does come with some storage, but this is adding additional volume. We don't need that. We're not going to be using that much space. We're going to be creating firewalls at a later time, and then we have the option for backups at about 20% of the cost. I think this is cool that that's an option. That makes it easy, kind of takes the thinking out of it. I'm not going to be setting that up at this time. I think it's a level of complexity we're just too early for at this moment. We're going to skip all of that, and we can choose a name. I'm going to leave the default name and just click down here in the bottom right, create and buy now. So right away, the server is being created and we're getting the IP address for it. I think I've said this in the other videos already, I have already done all of this for the organization I'm volunteering with. I've done a live migration, I recorded the whole thing, and the reason I'm not using that footage is because the IP address is just everywhere. So at this time, I'm going to keep my public IP available on the screen. By the time I publish this video, I will have already deleted the server, the ports will not be available, the passwords will not exist anymore. I want you to know that because I'm going to show you everything. I want to make this very easy to follow, and you should know for yourself, you should protect this IP, you should protect these passwords, you should not let this just be floating around anywhere. The internet is out there, they can get to you, they can mess you up if you leave this information available. But we will need this at a later time, and we will keep it kind of on the side right now. We'll go ahead and just copy it, and we'll go to our server. So we can see the server's been created, we can see our RAM, our CPU, and how much storage we have, and we can see our cost of how much we're paying live every hour. All right, so our Hetzner server has been created, and at that time you will receive an email with the IP address, which is also available right here at the top of the screen. And they're going to send you your user and root password. The user is probably going to be root, and we want that root password for SSH. This is a way to connect to your server remotely and execute commands. However, we won't be able to access it right off the bat. We will need to go to the firewalls and create a firewall. And they kind of start you out with the default port 22, which is for SSH. That's an inbound rule saying we can get to the server and it'll work just fine. Come down here and we'll choose the name of Firewall SSH, and it's applied to our one server. We'll click Create Firewall, and we can see the status of it taking effect live. And I'm going to be using a program called PuTTY to access SSH. If you don't have a way to do this, I would recommend PuTTY. It's a go-to for me. So inside of PuTTY, we are just going to paste our hostname IP address and then click Open. And we'll be asked to verify the key. We'll just click yes to that, and we're going to log in as root. And then we'll paste our password from the email into the SSH. Now, they're going to ask us to change the password right away. So I'm going to paste the current password and then come up to my Bitwarden, and I'm going to generate a new password and paste that. And we're all set. And we need to save that new password. This SSH password is very important. You cannot lose this. You cannot get access to this server in the future without it. So please make sure that you have SSH. However, if you do lose access to your root password, you can come to the Rescue tab and click Reset Root Password, and it will present you a new one. Additionally, I just found out if you don't want to use PuTTY, you can use this little console tab up here in the corner, and it'll open up cloud access. However, it's kind of scaling weird, so I'm going to stick to PuTTY, but that is an option if you need it. So we have access to our server. We are currently connected via SSH, and Docker was already installed when they created the server. We can check our Docker status by typing docker.ps and seeing if there's any containers running, which there are not. The first container I recommend that we start with is something called Portainer, which will give us a graphical user interface, a GUI, to actually see what's going on. And I think it's going to be a lot less intimidating if you're very, very new to the command line or new to all of this. If you're just following along to my video, I would strongly recommend this. And the rest of the video, I'll be using Portainer for most of the commands. While it's not strictly necessary, I think it makes it a little bit easier to manage. So the first thing we want to do is create a Docker volume, and we're going to just call it Portainer data. and it lists it right there. And then the second thing we're going to do is we're going to create a container called Portainer. And it has the default ports already set, the name is set, it'll restart as whenever it can, and it'll be the latest version. I'll have this code in my description and on my website so that you can follow along and just simply paste it. We can see that Portainer has finished, and if we run that docker.ps command again, we'll see it, but a little trick that you should know is pressing the up arrow will pull up your old commands, and we'll go up to docker.ps and press enter, and we can see that Portainer was created 14 seconds ago and its status is up. So we're going to be accessing Portainer on port 9443. It has a self-signed security certificate so that we can access it. However, on this machine, we don't have the firewall open to port 9443. So I'm going to come to our Firewall SSH, and I'm going to edit this. I'm going to simply add a rule for 9443, and I'm going to call it Portainer. The reason I'm creating this firewall under the SSH firewall is for a couple of reasons. The first reason being you're limited to 5 firewalls. Note, not rules, but actual firewalls. So I'm going to have this one for SSH, including Portainer, because we don't want to leave this open. We don't want SSH open to the internet for longer than we need it, and we don't want Portainer open to the internet for longer than we need it. So at the end of this video, we'll be turning off this firewall, and I'm going to just keep them bundled together. We'll click Save Changes, and the rule has been added and it's in effect. So with that 993 added, we're going to go to our server, and we're going to come click on our networking tab, and we have a primary IP, and we also have a reverse DNS. This reverse DNS makes it very easy for us to access our server, but you're not going to want your clients to be using this complicated address with your IP visible in it. This is something that you as an administrator should use, but you really shouldn't plan on giving this out to people. We will copy this into our address bar, and then we'll add the port 9443. And when it loads, it'll say we sent an HTTP request to an HTTPS server. And so the easy way we can fix this is coming to the beginning and typing HTTPS:// and it'll let us know the connection isn't private. This is because it is a self-signed certificate. It hasn't been validated, but it will work. So we can hit advanced and then continue, and we can suddenly see our Portainer interface. Now, this is going to be creating the admin user. I would suggest that you change the admin username to something secure or something that will be memorable, just so if someone on the internet somehow gets access to this port, it's one more thing that they're going to have to guess and not be using the defaults. We'll be using Bitwarden to generate a password, and then we'll create the user and save the password. So at this time, we do not need to be using SSH anymore, and we can close this window. We can maximize this Portainer instance, and our next video will be continuing here. Please note, if you are not ready to use this Portainer instance, to please come into your firewalls and turn off your firewall to allow this access, or at least delete the SSH one if we're not going to be using SSH. So if I weren't to be going on to this very next step, I would remove this firewall. But for recording purposes, I'm going into the next step. But if you're breaking this up over a couple of days, you want to stop this firewall. You don't want this open to the internet for any longer than it needs to be.